The first sign that the day was gone came before anyone explained anything. A woman ran past the open door of the communications room with one shoe in her hand and blood on the knee of her pant leg. Right behind her came a site police officer shoving people out of the corridor and yelling for badge checks, door control, and medical to get down to intake now. Phones were ringing on every console. The wallboard was filling with missed acknowledgements faster than Curtis Wynne could circle them. Somebody in records dropped a whole stack of folders outside our room and kept moving without picking up a single page. I pushed back from my station, looked into the hall, and saw 3 more people coming from the elevator lobby with travel bags, loose papers, and the flat look people get when they have stopped asking what is happening and started hunting for a place to stand. Curtis pointed at me before I could say a word. "Lauren, sit down and lock your board to priority only." I dropped back into the chair, pulled the routing sheet under my hand, and started cutting every low-level line that did not matter. County bridges, test loops, 2 admin circuits, one after another. The room was loud in a bad way. Not screaming, not movie panic. It was printers spitting paper, headsets leaking voices, chairs rolling, people talking over one another, and the sharp electronic tone that hits when a scheduled contact passes due and nobody answers. Irene Batra was on the next console over, trying to raise a federal relay in Pennsylvania while writing timestamps on her wrist with a marker after her notepad slid to the floor. I grabbed the log pad by my elbow, shoved Owen Pike's mug out of my reach, and started moving channels before the whole board froze under the load. The first call I caught clean came from a county emergency office west of us. The man on the line sounded out of breath and angry in the way people sound when they have already repeated the same problem to 5 people and nobody fixed it. He said his hospital had locked 2 wards, his sheriff wanted state support, and drivers were abandoning cars on the road outside town. I asked him for the callback number, staff count, and the status of his radio repeater. I got halfway through the form before shouting started on his side. Not one person shouting, a room full of people. Then, I heard a woman yell for someone to shut the back door. The man came back on and said, "Do you have federal troops moving or not?" I told him I was logging his traffic and routing it up. He said, "Route it fast," and the line went dead. Curtis snatched the printout out of my hand before it finished coming through the machine. He read it while standing over my shoulder, then folded it once and slid it into his shirt pocket. He had that hard look on his face he got when he was already working 3 steps ahead and did not have time to let anybody catch up. "We do not pass rumor up as fact," he said. I looked at the status board behind him. 3 state links had gone yellow in the last 10 minutes. One had turned red while he was talking to me. That was not rumor. That was the board telling the truth in real time. I said nothing and opened the next route. By mid-afternoon, the corridor outside our room looked like a train station after a bad announcement. People kept coming down from upper offices with bags, laptop cases, paper cartons, blankets, and the kind of office junk that means a person has not accepted what kind of place this is turning into. A man from procurement tried to drag a rolling suitcase through a badged door that had already been switched to staff-only access. 2 site police officers stopped him, took the suitcase, and sent him toward housing with only the bag on his shoulder. A cafeteria worker shoved a cart past all of them, loaded with bottled water, wrapped sandwiches, and coffee urns. Behind him came a maintenance crew with boxes of disposable coveralls and taped bundles of smaller air filters. Nobody moved slow. Nobody stood in one place unless a locked door forced it. I ran the Shenandoah relay check again and got 2 answers out of 3. The third path opened with clean carrier and no operator. I tested the return. Nothing. I checked the rack alarms. No fault lamps. That meant the line was reaching a working room where no one was at the desk or no one left could answer. I marked it active, no operator, and moved on. Irene hissed my name and pointed at a live video feed on the side monitor. Traffic camera, divided highway, every lane blocked, drivers outside vehicles, 1 bus door standing open, a man in a road vest waving both arms at cars that could not move anyway. Then a woman near the median went down hard and stopped moving. Nobody near her bent to help. They backed away. The clip reset and played again. Curtis cut the speaker and told me to mark the feed unconfirmed civil disorder. I did it, but the label looked weak on the page. At 5:20, the lower gate started flooding our board. Vehicle accountability, intake prep, command routing, medical request, security override. I could hear the guard channel on monitor audio while I kept the main console open. One driver refused search. One passenger list did not match the van count. Medical wanted a controlled lane cleared for a fever case arriving with the next group. Security wanted names on everyone already in the tunnel. The site did not shut all at once. It narrowed in rings. Outer deliveries stopped. Side access died. Internal movement started getting cut by badge level. Curtis walked the room once and said, "No one leaves site unless command clears it." No speech, no comfort. He moved on to the next console. My overnight bag was in the locker room upstairs. My phone was in the side pocket. My sister was north of Frederick. I had no approved personal line and no idea if towers were even working. I got up during a gap in the queue, told Irene I was grabbing my bag, and took the stairs 2 at a time. The upper corridor was louder than our room. People were crowded around dead phones near a vent where service sometimes leaked through from outside. One woman from Budget was crying and trying to type a text with no signal at all. A site police sergeant told her to move on and clear the wall. In the locker room, half the doors were open. Somebody had left a blouse, a charger, and a pair of flats on the bench. I grabbed my bag, checked my phone, got nothing, and headed back down before another access door locked behind a posture change. When I returned, Dr. Ruth Carden was standing by Curtis's desk with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a disposable gown tied over her scrubs. The gown was wrinkled and wet at one sleeve. Ruth did not waste words. She said one intake arrival had a forearm bite, 103-degree fever, and sudden confusion. She wanted direct priority to Winchester Medical Center and the state lab. Curtis told her the command circuit was stacked, and she had to wait for a slot. Ruth leaned forward and said, "I do not need a slot. I need an answer." Curtis kept his voice flat and asked if the patient was isolated. She said yes. He asked if the patient had confirmed lab results. She said no, and gave him a look that made it clear she knew exactly how useless that question was. Curtis told her not to use contamination language on open channels until command released terms. Ruth stared at him for a second, then turned and walked out without signing the edge of the desk sheet he had put in front of her. Not long after that, a dock worker named Travis Kerr came past our door with his left hand wrapped in gauze and tape. A medtech was on one side of him, and a site police officer was on the other. Travis kept trying to look into our room as he walked by, trying to catch a piece of information nobody had given him yet. The tape on his hand had already spotted through. The officer stopped long enough to sign a transfer note with Curtis. Travis did not stop moving. A few minutes later, a food service worker rolled up with a mop bucket and asked where he could get more absorbent pads for screening. He said somebody had thrown up in intake and then gone down on the floor. Curtis pointed him towards supply and waved him off without lifting his eyes from the incident slips piling up by his elbow. At 7:10, the secure call from Washington opened and changed the whole place in less than 10 minutes. We did not hear the full conversation. We heard what came down to our level after command processed it. Seal authority approved. Tiered closure begins now. External traffic restricted to approved continuity routes. Pending arrivals frozen at lower screening. No non-mission message release. Curtis wrote the order code on the wall and underlined it once. Irene started shutting bridge lines. I cut county circuits in sequence and watched whole sections of the board go dark. A man from records came in with 2 red burn bags and started clearing old contact sheets by date, while I rebuilt the priority ladder for the overnight cycle. Every time I reached for a line that should have answered, I found another ring out, another empty room, another clean carrier, with nobody left at the far end. Food came through at 6:30, then again close to 10, but nobody ate like it was a meal. People took what they could hold in one hand and kept working. I drank warm coffee, bit through half a sandwich, and kept logging failures. A state police dispatcher called 5 times in 40 minutes, asking for federal support on Interstate 70. On the first call, she sounded controlled. On the third, she was talking faster. On the 5th, she said the road was blocked with abandoned cars. Her supervisor was down, and the people moving between vehicles were not stopping for commands. Then her line filled with noise and cut flat. I saved the audio locally instead of on the main archive, which was not standard. Irene saw me do it, tore a corner off a routing sheet, wrote "keep" on it, and slid it under my hand without looking over. Night shift never fully made it in. 2 people reached the room, 3 did not. Curtis broke the staffing board apart and rebuilt it in marker. 90 minutes on, 20 off, reduced coverage until further notice. I took my first break in the hall outside the room on a folding chair with my bag between my boots. Across the corridor, facilities rolled another pallet of filters toward the air plant access. Vernon Glass was with them, beard damp with sweat, shirt dark at the collar, moving faster than I had ever seen him move. He stopped long enough to tell me the upper intake gates were going to full isolation, and they were stripping parts from a reserve section to hold flow. Then he was gone around the corner, with the pallet jack handle rattling against the floor seams. Around midnight, Ruth came back. Her scrub top had a smear on one cuff and the gown was gone. She asked for the extension to Quarantine Wing 2. Curtis handed it over. She did not move right away. She looked at him and said, "The man from intake stopped for 4 minutes. Then he got up during transfer and put one orderly on the floor." No one in the room answered her. Curtis looked at me and said, "Lock the county mutual aid channels to record. No speaker output." I switched them over and put one earphone cup tight against my head. 12 minutes later, a fire lieutenant from Clark County came through clear enough to raise the hair on my arms, even sitting still at a console. He said one deputy had gone after a bite at a traffic stop. He said they checked for pulse twice. He said the deputy was moving again in the bay, and they needed state guidance now. Then, metal slammed in the background, somebody shouted for restraints, and the line dissolved into overlapping voices and static. A little after 1, the guard channel reported the last closure. Outer gate secure, tunnel secure, service lift secure, upper access hard locked, medical screening complete for current intake, no further arrivals authorized. Curtis wrote sealed under the posture code and capped the marker. Nobody in our room said a word. Irene took off her headset, rubbed her forehead with the heel of her hand, and asked if that meant family message windows would open. Curtis said command would issue guidance when approved text was ready. Irene gave one short laugh, put the headset back on, and went to work on another failed line. My queue was full of missed check-ins and dead retries. I started clearing the ladder from the top. Richmond answered with an automated message. A federal relay in Pennsylvania opened to room tone and no operator. Another county office gave me a fax scream. Then, one small emergency office west of us picked up on the second ring. A woman answered in a low voice and said she could hear me. I asked for site status. She said 6 people remained in the building. They had 1 working radio, 2 injured staff, and enough generator fuel to reach dawn if they killed heat in the back half of the office. I asked if roads were passable. She said no. I asked if she could hold for relay. She went quiet for a second, then asked, "Are you a shelter?" I looked at Curtis. He was reading another slip without looking up. I told her I was a communications technician and I could take a message. She said, "Tell whoever is listening we stayed on post." Then the line dropped. I logged her message, saved the audio twice, and moved to the next line before the room pulled me into thinking about her office, her generator, or what dawn was going to look like for 6 people sitting in a county building with no road out. West Virginia Emergency Management rang through to an automated menu and then dropped. A federal relay in Ohio answered with a secure handshake and no operator. A city dispatch center in Maryland came up open mic long enough for me to hear chairs scraping, somebody crying, and a radio speaker giving the same address 3 times with no unit answer. I marked each one, kicked each line to archive or retry, and kept going until Curtis stopped beside my chair and held out a fresh routing sheet. Overnight cycle, reduced contact tree, priority sites only. I took the sheet, saw how short it was compared with the one I had started the shift with, and understood that command had already given up on half the map in practice, even if nobody upstairs had said so out loud. Curtis told Irene to take 10 minutes in the hall, and told me to keep both secure trunks under direct monitor until he came back from command review. He walked out carrying the red file box with the incident slips in it. I watched him disappear into the corridor, then turned back to the board and listened to the building settle into its first sealed night. The sound changed once the upper access shut. Less foot traffic, more fans and doors. The hall speaker clicked every few minutes with housing assignments, medical screening notices, and orders about water use in residential sections. The intake channel stayed busy. Security wanted a hard count of every late arrival. Medical wanted a decontamination lane held clear. Facilities wanted to know whether housing could release 2 maintenance workers back to air plant support before 0200. I passed messages where they needed to go, logged who answered, and wrote down who did not. That part felt ordinary on the surface. A person asked for a line. I gave him a line. A supervisor wanted an update. I gave her an update. The words moving through the wires were the only place where the building was telling the truth. At 1:50, Ruth Carden called in from Quarantine Wing 2 on an internal extension, with enough line noise behind her to tell me she was standing in a hall or doorway, not sitting at a desk. She wanted a direct patch to Site Command Medical and the emergency response team in the same loop. I asked for the code phrase to override the normal request chain. She gave it to me, and I patched her through. I could hear pieces of the conversation while I worked another trunk. One orderly had gone down with facial exposure during transfer. One site police officer had taken a forearm bite while helping secure the patient from intake. The patient had no measurable pulse before movement resumed. Site Command Medical told her to document activity level, motor response, and pupil condition. Ruth said she did not have time for a textbook exchange and needed restraint kits, face shields, and a corridor closed before somebody else walked into the wrong room. I watched Curtis's empty chair while she said it. Nobody from command asked how many staff had already crossed that hall. The closure order came 2 minutes later. Corridor blew from medical cross hall to isolation support. Badge access suspended, security control only. I pushed the notice to guard stations, fire response, housing, and logistics. Half the people who got it called back at once, wanting to know why that corridor had gone red on their map. I gave everyone the same line from the typed order. Temporary clinical containment. Use alternate routes. No exceptions. A man from procurement started arguing that he had a locked office past the closure, with contract records inside. I told him to call his supervisor. He said his supervisor was in quarantine intake. I gave him the housing desk extension and ended the line. The next call was from a food service lead trying to get breakfast stock through that same cross hall. I rerouted her around the lower service ramp and told her she would need escort clearance. She swore softly, thanked me, and hung up. I kept one ear on Ruth's open patch the whole time. Twice I heard bodies hitting something heavy. Once I heard Ruth tell somebody to stop saying seizure and look at the neck wound on the orderly before he touched him barehanded. Around 2:30, Irene came back in with her hair tied up tighter than before and a coffee stain on one sleeve. She sat down, read the shortened overnight ladder, and looked over at me without saying anything for a second. Then she leaned close and asked, "Did he cut family message windows again?" I told her command had not opened them. She took off one earpiece, rubbed her temple with 2 fingers, and said, "Then he knows more than he's saying." I did not answer. She did not need one. We both went back to work. The guard channel was steady for the next 40 minutes. Housing noise dropped. Intake traffic slowed. One of the secure trunks opened to a continuity site in the Midwest with a live operator on the other end for the first time in over an hour. The operator was a man with a flat voice reading from some kind of emergency card. He confirmed his site status as sealed, operational, medical pressure elevated, external response degraded. Then he asked if we had confirmed post-mortem activity in febrile cases. The wording was clean and wrong for the thing he meant. I looked at Irene. She had frozen over her keyboard. I said our site was under medical review and routed him to command. Dawn never reached us directly, but the clock and the work cycle told me when it arrived outside. The overnight board lost what little chatter it still had from local agencies. Then a different kind of traffic started coming through. State transportation asking for fuel status from depots that did not answer. Hospitals requesting refrigerated storage support. Law enforcement mutual aid, or bodies to be moved coordination. County offices wanting generator parts, insulin, or simple head counts from towns nobody could reach anymore. Every answer we gave got narrower. We had no mobile units to dispatch, no bed capacity to offer, no public shelter list cleared for release. A woman from a school district in Northern Virginia called, looking for state guidance on parents gathering at locked buildings. I took her details, gave her the only routing code I was allowed to share, and listened to her ask whether anyone from Richmond was still there before the line cut out. By then, Curtis was back at his desk with a new wall printout from Command. National restoration operations underway. Civil disorder associated with acute febrile syndrome in multiple regions. Shelter in place for all civilians. Await local authority guidance. I read it twice and felt the room turn colder without any change in air. At 7, housing finally started assigning communication staff temporary bunks for forced site stay. Curtis handed me a slip with dorm section, room number, locker code, and meal block. I looked at it and saw that I had been placed 2 floors below the administrative wing, in a room built for 3. Irene got one in the same corridor. Neither of us moved. We were still on reduced rotation, and the morning ladder was buried in failures. A woman from housing called 3 times in 20 minutes, asking why communications had not claimed its assigned bed packets. Curtis told her we would get there when the board allowed it. He was not kind about it. After the 3rd call, he stood up, pulled 2 shrink-wrapped bedding packets from a cart someone had parked in the hall, dropped one on my desk and one on Irene's, and told us not to make him solve our sleep for us. He had not sat down for hours. His shirt collar was dark with sweat and his jaw was tight enough to change the shape of his face. None of that made him easier to deal with. I got my first look at the residential side a little after 8, when Irene took my secure trunk for 12 minutes and shoved me out of my chair before I could argue. The dorm corridor looked less like a federal facility and more like a school building after a storm evacuation. People were sitting on duffel bags against the walls waiting for room keys or extra blankets. 2 older men in office clothes were arguing with a housing clerk over room assignments and access levels. One of them said he had senior agency rank and should not be quartered with contractors. The clerk, a tired woman named Janine Rusk with a paper roster in one hand and a ring of keys clipped to her belt, told him he could either take the room or sleep on the floor in Rec Room 2. He took the room. Down the hall, a nurse from medical was trying to find cots for 3 late-arriving support staff who had failed screening for fatigue but not for fever. Every water fountain had a line. Every vending machine was dark. On one bulletin board, somebody had posted a hand-lettered sign that said, "No personal showers longer than 4 minutes." Someone else had crossed out 4 and written 2. My room had 3 bunks, 2 wall lockers, and a narrow desk bolted under a mirror. One lower bunk was already claimed by a woman from procurement whose name card on the locker read Sonia Bell. The second lower bunk had a folded blanket at the foot and a duffel with a postal sticker from one of the agencies upstairs. I took the top bunk, shoved my bag under it, and left the bedding packet unopened. There was no point making the bed when I had maybe 10 minutes before someone came to drag me back to the board. Sonia Bell was sitting on her bunk counting blister packs of something against a printed medication sheet. She looked up once, said she was trying to sort what she had before medical took over private meds control, and went back to counting. I washed my face in the room sink with cold water, looked at my phone one more time out of habit, got nothing, and went straight back to work. The command briefing at 8:30 went out over the internal information net to every office, dorm, and service room in the site. The speaker in communications was low, but the words carried. A deputy continuity director named Paul Drennan did the talking. I knew his face from site drills and interagency exercises, though he had never once learned my name. He said the federal government remained operational. He said temporary disruptions to transport, law enforcement, and hospital systems were being addressed. He said some victims of the current illness had displayed unusual agitation and impaired pain response. He said all staff should avoid rumor and trust verified channels only. Then he thanked everyone for professionalism and restraint under pressure. While he was still speaking, Ruth called our room and asked for a direct patch to Security Command, decontamination support, and the site morgue coordinator. I gave her the patch and listened to Drennan talk about calm, while Ruth said she needed a second temporary body room, sealed transport carts, and one officer removed from duty before he walked out of quarantine observation against her order. That officer's name was Dale Mercer. I learned it from the incident log that came across my console 10 minutes later. Bite on left forearm during patient restraint, cleaned and dressed at 0210, fever at 0740. refused observation extension at 0820, located at security locker room at 0832, and escorted back by 2 officers. When the escort request hit the board, I patched it through without thinking. When the follow-up notice came in asking for additional medical staff at the quarantine side door, I slowed down long enough to read the remarks field. Subject combative, does not answer to name consistently. I looked over at Curtis. He was copying selected incident summaries onto a shorter handwritten sheet for command review. A full typed log sat under his hand. He folded the handwritten sheet, pocketed it, and left the typed log under a file folder. When he stepped away to take a secure call, I leaned across, slid the folder just far enough to see the top entries, and caught 3 words in Ruth's notes that would not appear in Drennan's public briefing. Dead interval observed. I put the folder back exactly where it had been and went back to my board before Curtis turned around. That small look changed the rest of the morning for me. Up to that point, I had been trying to decide whether command was behind events or only behind the language. The answer was clear. They had enough information to stop talking around the issue, and they were choosing not to. That did not mean they had a cure, a solution, or a plan worth trusting. It only meant they were trying to hold the building together with controlled wording, while people down on medical and intake were dealing with something that did not care what term went into the public release. I kept working and said none of it out loud. I had one job I knew how to do: hold the lines, move the messages, keep the records cleaner than the people above me wanted them. That was as close to leverage as I had in that chair. By late morning, the first approved family message window opened for essential staff. It was not a phone call. It was a typed outgoing notice of no more than 200 characters to pre-registered emergency contacts, subject to review and delayed release if external pathways were unavailable. I pulled my sister's number and email from the staff emergency file, typed, "I am on mandatory site hold and safe right now. If you receive this, stay indoors, avoid hospitals unless necessary, and do not travel." Then I sat there with my hand over the send key. Curtis was reviewing outbound text at the end of the row. Irene had already submitted one and gotten hers kicked back for using too many characters. I cut my message down twice, removed safe right now, put it back in, removed it again, and finally sent the shortest version that still felt like something my sister would know came from me. The message went into pending review and vanished into the system. No confirmation came back. No delivery notice. Nothing I could act on. A little after noon, the site tried its first controlled surface run after sealing. The order moved through the board in pieces. Security team, fire response support, 1 utilities tech, 1 logistics lead, 1 driver. Objective: county fuel annex and public health storage building within limited radius. Duration: 4 hours. Cargo priority: diesel stabilizer, boxed medical supplies, water treatment consumables, sealed food stock if present. Route secrecy level: internal only. I handled the communications prep with Curtis standing behind me. Primary truck radio, backup handheld net, emergency burst code, check-in schedule every 30 minutes, deadman call at 2 hours, return gate procedure, decontamination lane reservation. The emergency response lead on the run was a broad-shouldered woman named Cora Boone from Site Fire and Rescue. I knew her only by voice before that day. In person, she moved fast, spoke with no wasted motion, and had the habit of looking at doors, hinges, and ceiling corners before she looked at faces. She leaned into our room long enough to confirm the check-in interval and ask if county roads north of the site had given any recent answer. I told her no. She nodded once and left. When the outer service lift cycled and the team went up, half the building seemed to listen for it. The sound came through the concrete and the ductwork as a distant mechanical grind, followed by a stretch of dead space on the guard channel, while the upper door opened and the vehicle rolled out. Then the radio crackled back to life. Gate clear, team rolling, weather overcast, road surface wet from overnight. No civilian traffic visible in first mile. I wrote every word. 30 minutes later, Cora Boone called in from the county road near the old transfer station. Abandoned vehicles in eastbound lane. 1 minor blockage. Route passable. No visible civilians. At the next check-in, her driver reported the fuel annex fence had been cut and 1 storage cage was open. No one visible moving in the yard. Team entering with caution. I logged it and passed the update to command, logistics, and gate control. Curtis pocketed that slip too. The building used the team's absence to tighten itself in smaller ways. Housing cut second helpings in the cafeteria. Medical took over private medication control from dorm residents and posted collection bins with guards beside them. Showers went to 1-minute intervals in 2 sections after a water use review. Facilities posted yellow tape over a bank of restrooms on the lowest residential level and moved everyone to the next corridor over. Janine Rusk from housing called our room twice asking whether we had updated numbers on long-term population after the sealed intake roster was finalized. Curtis told her to get them from command. She said command had referred her back to communications for occupancy-linked staffing. Curtis told her to send a runner and hung up. A young man in a blue logistics polo showed up 12 minutes later with a clipboard. I gave him the head count we had from the active badge list, told him it was incomplete by at least 1 medical wing and part of the tunnel support crew, and watched his face change when he realized even basic numbers in the site were already starting to slide out of alignment. Cora Boone's team missed its 2-hour deadman call by 7 minutes. Those 7 minutes changed the room more than Drennan's entire briefing had. Irene stopped pretending to sort her queue and turned fully toward my side of the board. Curtis came out of his office with the red file box still in hand. The guard channel went quiet except for one gate officer asking if command wanted the recovery package brought forward. At 7 minutes, Boone's voice came through with engine noise under it. She was breathing hard enough to flatten her words, but she was clear. Team delayed at public health building. Entry successful. 1 worker injured by glass during loading. 1 non-responsive subject in storage corridor rose during approach. Subject slow, no verbal response, did not stop on command. Team diverted around subject and completed load. Returning now. Need medical at gate for laceration and possible exposure review. She did not say what rose. She did not need to. Curtis wrote return with clinical incident on his sheet and sent it up. The return decontamination cycle took over our channels for the next hour. Outer gate clear. Vehicle wash lane active. Team dismount by pair. Contaminated cargo separated. Medical screening first. Fire response gear bagged. No one enters inner service hall until cleared. I passed messages between decon, medical, logistics, and command, while the team moved through station by station. Through one internal camera feed, I could see only pieces of it. Boots on grating. A wash wand moving in short, hard arcs over a truck tire. A medic holding up gloved hands for a responder to turn in place. One utilities man sitting on a folding chair with his pant leg cut open to clean a deep slice along the shin. Boone came into the frame once, visor up, face drawn and grey with road dust, arguing with somebody outside the camera edge. She pointed at the cargo cages with one hand, while keeping the other hand away from her body. That gesture stayed with me. It was the move of a person who knew contamination had become something physical and immediate, not a memo term. Ruth called us during the decontamination cycle and asked for full logs on the return team, including exact times each member removed face shields, gloves, and outer layers. I told her those details were on the decon side with Boone's people. Ruth said one member had already touched his own face while waiting for secondary screening. I routed her to decon and watched 2 calls light up at once from command wanting status before medical completed any review. That was the pattern forming in plain sight. Medical wanted process. Command wanted narrative. Security wanted controlled doors. Logistics wanted cargo off the lane before it spoiled or blocked the next move. Each one made sense from where that person stood. Put together, it felt like a machine starting to grind itself at the edges. When Boone finally called in cleared for limited duty, she asked for one extra thing before ending the line. She wanted all internal hall cameras between service access and decon support preserved for the next 12 hours. I asked if there had been an incident on the lane. She said, "Not on the lane, on the way off it." Then she hung up. I marked the preservation request and sent it to records. 10 minutes later, a guard sergeant called, wanting to know why camera retention had been extended without command approval. I told him the request came from emergency response lead after possible exposure handling error. He said he would take it up with command. I told him he was free to do that. My board lit up again before he could say more. That afternoon, I finally got 25 minutes off the console. I took my tray to the cafeteria, found one end of a long table with 2 empty chairs, and sat across from a janitor named Reggie Sloan, who was eating canned peaches straight from the cup with a plastic fork. The room was packed and too quiet for the number of people in it. Most conversations stayed low and short. One cluster of agency staff in the corner was arguing over whether the public radio feed had gone down before or after the last televised briefing. Near the service line, 2 medical techs in wrinkled gowns were dividing unopened crackers into separate pockets for later. Reggie asked if communications was hearing from Richmond. I told him not much. He nodded, chewed, and said he had been sent to sanitize intake 3 times and was done asking what kind of flu made a dead man get back up. 3 people at the table turned toward him at once. Reggie looked down at his peaches and kept eating. Nobody corrected him. I took my tray back to the belt, filled 2 paper cups with coffee I did not need, and started walking back toward communications when the hall speaker cut in with a coded notice for medical response team and security to report to decon support immediately. The second notice came 20 seconds later and added corridor restrictions. By the time I got to our room, Curtis was already on the phone with gate control, and Irene was bringing up the whole camera grid Boone had asked us to preserve. The first camera showed an equipment cage outside decon support. A man in utilities coveralls was sitting on the floor with his back to the wall, while a medic knelt beside him. I recognized the coveralls from the surface run. The utilities man had the shin cut. On the next camera, one of the decon aides who had worked the lane was bent over a sink in the support room. Another aide backed away from him. The aide at the sink turned too fast, hit the faucet with his shoulder, and went down. Then the camera shook as somebody on site grabbed the wall console inside that room, and the image cut. The guard channel broke open with overlapping voices. Need restraint team. No, do not enter with soft gear. Close the support door. Who has the key on the outer cage? I pulled what I could into sequence, sent corridor closures to every desk that needed them, and patched Ruth, Boone, and security command into one line so they could stop burning time calling each other in circles. Ruth was the first one to say what the issue was. Fever in decon aid, sudden collapse, recovered motor activity after apparent arrest, utilities worker also febrile, 1 bite on second aid's wrist during contact. Boone swore once and asked who had let the febrile worker remain in the support room after surface team processing. Nobody answered. Security command asked whether the support room shared ventilation with residential service hall. Facilities came in on the line and said the room had local return with no shared feed if the fire dampers were closed. Boone told him to close them now, cut supply if he had to, and give her manual confirmation instead of trusting a board light. That was the first moment I felt the bunker itself become part of the fight. Until then, the problem had been patients, roads, agencies, screenings, and language. Now it was ducts, doors, drains, hinges, keys, sightlines, and the exact route a person had taken while taking off contaminated gear. Facilities sent a man to the damper access. Security stacked outside the cage. Ruth demanded 2 more medics in face shields and 1 rolling crash cart. Boone overruled the crash cart and said nothing with exposed drawers was coming into that hall until containment held. Curtis stood between our 2 nearest consoles with a printed floor plan in his hand, tracing routes with a capped pen and deciding which departments got told what. The first site-wide notice described it as an occupational exposure incident with temporary movement restrictions in lower service areas. That lie lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes later, the support room door buckled hard enough on camera to shake dust out of the frame. The second aide, who had backed away from the sink worker, had made it into the hall and collapsed halfway to the outer cage. A medic tried to pull her back by the straps of her gown. The utilities man came through the support room doorway low and fast for someone who had been sitting against a wall 3 minutes earlier. He did not speak. He did not react to the medic shouting his name. He went straight toward movement. Security drove him back with a shield and closed the inner gate while Boone's team got a hard restraint on the aide in the hall. One officer lost footing on the wet floor and hit the wall with enough force to drop his flashlight. The light spun on the concrete, throwing white arcs across boots and door frames until someone kicked it under the cage. I was watching on a monitor 3 rooms away and logging timestamps while my hands kept working the board like the rest of me had split off. Curtis finally stopped using clinical wording after that. He sent a restricted notice to command, medical, security, and facilities that said decon breach with hostile febrile subjects and probable fluid exposure across multiple staff. He did not send that version site-wide. The site-wide notice went out 2 minutes after and called it a medical containment event involving injured responders. A janitor called our room from residential cleaning, asking whether his route past lower service had been cancelled. I told him yes, and to hold where he was. He asked if this was the same thing intake had. I told him to hold where he was. After I hung up, Irene looked at me and said, "If housekeeping knows, housing knows." She was right. Rumor outran the speakers in under half an hour. By evening, people in the dorm corridors were using 3 different names for the cases in quarantine: fevermen, returners, dead sick. None of the terms changed what happened when one of them got loose in a room. The decon breach locked half the lower service level for the rest of the day, and most of the night. Boone ran the containment with Ruth arguing into her shoulder half the time, and backing her the other half when security tried to rush the process. The infected worker from decon support was secured in the room he had started in. The utilities man made it into the outer hall, and had to be driven into the equipment cage with shields and poles from fire response. The second aide never fully regained speech after the bite, and fever came on fast enough that medical moved her directly into hard isolation. 4 staff members who had crossed the lane during the wrong 20-minute window went into observation whether they agreed or not. Reggie Sloan from housekeeping got added to the list when they realized he had mopped the support room threshold before symptoms started, and had wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of a contaminated glove. I heard his name on the line, pictured the canned peaches in his hand, and kept writing. By then, the rest of the world had not improved enough to give the bunker any comfort. One continuity site in the south checked in to say its state liaison desk was gone dark, and one of its medical wings had shifted to armed entry only. A state emergency office in the Midwest sent a burst message saying fuel and law enforcement support were no longer expected, and local retention of supplies was authorized. Authorized by whom, the message did not say. A National Weather Service radio loop kept rebroadcasting routine forecasts over counties where no public safety traffic answered anymore. 2 commercial stations went silent in the same hour. One church broadcaster west of us stayed on the air with prayer and traffic updates until near midnight, then cut to an open carrier that hummed without voice for 20 minutes before dropping off. I logged all of it and stopped expecting the next line to carry useful direction. Near the end of that second day, Curtis made me carry a packet of communications archive forms to records myself rather than sending a runner. I think he wanted me out of the room for 10 minutes. I took the packet, crossed the hall, signed the handoff, and noticed a stack of fresh binders on the counter in records marked revised continuity summaries. One binder was open to a page of incident language approved for interagency release. I did not touch it. I did not need to. From where I stood, I could read one line in the center of the page. Subjects may display motor persistence after apparent cardiac cessation. I stayed long enough to let that settle in my head as official wording, and then went back with the signed receipt. Curtis took it, glanced at my face once, and knew I had seen something. He said nothing. I said nothing. We both went back to the work the building kept demanding from us every minute we were awake. Sleep became a thing the site talked about more than it actually allowed. I made it to my bunk a little after 1 in the morning, kicked off my shoes, pulled the blanket over me, and lay there listening to doors open and shut down the corridor. Sonia Bell was on the lower bunk filling out medication surrender forms by the light of the desk lamp. The other bunk's owner had arrived while I was on shift, a thin man in his 50s from transportation analysis named Warren Keel, who snored once, stopped, turned over, and started again. I had one of the small battery radios from my bag pressed to my ear, volume almost off, cycling through static and half signals from outside. I caught a county sheriff's office running short on units, then a volunteer fire department asking whether anyone knew if bites counted as contamination or trauma, then nothing. At some point I closed my eyes. The next thing I knew, a housing runner was shaking my shoulder and telling me communications were short again. Day 3 started with fewer formalities. Breakfast went to paper bags handed out at the dorm doors. The command briefing got shorter and more vague. Drennan said national coordination remained active through protected channels and staff should refrain from discussing clinical observations outside duty need. He did not take questions. Boone called before 7 asking for a private line to facilities and transport. She wanted a manual route that bypassed the lower service corridor entirely for medical waste, food delivery, and maintenance access. The lower corridor could no longer be treated as a normal passage even after containment. Too many people had crossed it, cleaned it, or worked it during the bad window. Facilities resisted at first, then gave in when Boone asked whether the same supervisor wanted his crew using a hall where 2 infected staff had been physically pushed into a cage less than a day earlier. Curtis had me draft the reroute notice and clear it with security. By 9, half the site's daily movement pattern had been rebuilt around one contaminated hall. That same morning, Ruth finally got a direct medical data exchange with a hospital system farther south that had not gone fully dark yet. I patched the call and monitored the line long enough to catch what mattered. Their cases were tracking the same way: exposure through bites and fluid contact, fever, confusion, loss of speech in some, aggression in most, cessation of pulse or breathing, followed by resumed movement in a short window, response to sound and motion, no sign of normal pain reaction, cold slowing some cases outdoors but not stopping them. The physician on the other end asked if our facility had long-term secure isolation and independent air handling. Ruth answered yes to both, then added, "We have those today." The line went quiet for a second after she said it. Not one person on that call pretended any of this was ending soon. Around noon, security started confiscating personal radios from dorm residents after too many people began sharing outside reports across sections. Janine Rusk called our room with 3 separate complaints from agency staff who said they had the right to monitor public information. Curtis told her site command had suspended personal receivers in shared spaces, and she could route appeals through continuity administration. Janine laughed once and said continuity administration had stopped answering her extension. I heard the fatigue in her voice. I heard it in everyone's by then. When I went to the cafeteria for another paper bag meal, I saw one man in a suit trying to keep a portable news radio hidden under his tray, while a site police officer stood over him with an evidence envelope. Across the room, Reggie Sloane's usual chair was empty. In the line by the urns, 2 women from records were saying the road crews outside had started calling the infected drifters since they moved towards sound and kept wandering after everything else on the road had stopped. The first confirmed death inside the bunker from the new illness that was not tied to the original intake patient came late that afternoon. It was not in decon, it was in observation. One of the 4 staff held after the surface run, spiked a fever, stopped answering questions, then arrested during transfer to a higher security room. Ruth called time, stood down for 12 seconds, and then had to order her own team back into the room when movement resumed on the gurney. I knew all of that from the internal patch I was holding open, while another console handled a secure line from a darkening federal office in St. Louis. The doctor on our end said, "Not dead then," with the kind of flat tone a person uses when there is no time left for shock. After that, Boone requested bolt kits for 3 more room doors, and hard shields moved from riot storage to medical support. Drennan's evening message said one staff member had deteriorated due to acute complications associated with exposure and urged everyone to respect medical restrictions. The wording kept getting weaker while the problem got clearer. That evening, Irene found me alone at the coffee station and asked if I had family in the blackout zones. I told her my sister was north of Frederick. She told me her son was in college in Ohio, and she had no confirmation he even knew to leave campus before the roads closed. She did not cry. She did not ask for comfort. She set 2 sugar packets on the counter and crushed them flat with the heel of her hand without opening them. Then she said, "If command had told us what they knew the first night, half this building would have made different choices." I asked what choices she thought anyone had once the site sealed. She looked at me for a second and said, "Not in here. Before." Then she walked back to her console. I stood there with a paper cup in my hand and had no answer worth saying. Day 4 brought the first real fight on the residential side. It started over room assignments and private medication, but the issue under it was food. Rationing had tightened again after logistics completed a full inventory, and after the surface run returned with less sealed stock than command had hoped, the cafeteria moved to measured portions by badge block. Seconds ended. Open condiment racks vanished. People noticed. A procurement analyst named Neil Gruber got into a shouting match with a maintenance supervisor over an extra bag of crackers taken from a service cart. A site police officer stepped in. Gruber shoved the cart. The supervisor shoved back. Trays hit the floor. Nobody drew anything. Nobody got badly hurt. What made the fight travel through the bunker was how fast it spread by word of mouth. By the time the report reached our board, some version of it had turned into a riot, a food theft ring, and an agency purge depending on who told it. Boone asked for the raw incident timestamp and camera references, not the summary. I gave her those and nothing else. That same afternoon, Warren Keel from my room did not show up for his assigned transport analysis shift. Housing tracked him to the rec room on the second residential level, sitting against the wall with two other men listening to an unplugged table radio that could not possibly receive anything. Janine Russ called the room and asked if communications had seen any badge movement from him near our floor. I checked. Nothing since the previous night. She thanked me and said she was sending medical for welfare review. An hour later, she called back asking whether we had any quiet duty posts left for a man who had not slept properly in 3 days, and kept insisting that the site would open the doors as soon as Washington fixed the roads. We had no quiet duty posts. Nobody did. She assigned him to bedding support under observation and moved on to the next name on her list. That was how the bunker started wearing people down who had not been bitten, cut, or exposed. It took their schedules apart and left them standing in halls with a badge and no solid use for it. The next surface mission was smaller and meaner. No county depot, no public health building. Boone argued that we needed route intelligence more than cargo, and pushed for a short-range road survey around utility access, nearby wells, and the old public works yard down the valley. Drennan wanted more supplies instead. Curtis was in command review for part of that fight, and when he came back, his face gave away enough for me to know the decision had gone ugly upstairs. In the end, Boone got 1 vehicle instead of 2, 1 utilities man, 1 security pair, no logistics specialist, and a strict 90-minute window. I handled the route call-up and deadman schedule again. This time, Boone asked me to hold 1 local weather frequency and monitor, and 1 county public works repeater if it opened. If anybody out there is keeping pumps alive, I want to hear him, she said. I told her I would hold it. She nodded and went out. The survey run found more than command wanted and less than the bunker needed. Boone reported stalled cars on the lower county road, 1 school bus left angled across an intersection, and a church parking lot full of vehicles with no visible movement. She found the public works yard fenced and mostly intact from the road with 1 service gate hanging open and no sign of active use. She also found infected moving in small, loose groups near a grocery loading dock uphill from it, all of them slow until the truck engine echoed off the buildings. Then heads turned. Then movement gathered towards sound. Her driver backed them out without contact. On the weather monitor, I picked up a county public works repeater, keying twice with no voice in between. On the 3rd key, a man came through asking if Station 2 had anyone alive on site. I patched the frequency to record and tried to raise him through the relay. He never answered a 2nd time. That night, Boone came through communications in person after decon, instead of calling from the hall. She had a cut across 1 knuckle sealed under clear dressing, and a clean shirt someone from stores had found for her after her turnout coat was bagged. She put a folded county map on my desk and tapped 1 fenced rectangle near the valley road. If we ever have to leave this place on work trucks and bad luck, that yard has wells, bays, and room for fences, she said. Then she straightened up and added, I'm not asking for it to go in the official notes. I looked at the map, then at her. Then why show me? I asked. Boone glanced toward Curtis's office and said, because communications hears what people stop saying to each other first. Then she took the map back, folded it, and walked out before I could ask anything else. I did not get to think about that long. 10 minutes later, Ruth called for immediate patch to command and demanded authority to move 2 observation patients into long-term, hard isolation with no release review by security. One was the bitten aide from decon support. The other was Dale Mercer, the officer from intake who had insisted on walking out before his fever hit. Dale had become harder to manage than the original intake patient. He did not talk. He threw himself into doors when footsteps passed. He tracked movement through the glass. He had bitten through his own bandage and reopened the wound to the point that medical stopped trying to keep it covered. Security wanted to know whether he was legally still a patient or now a threat requiring use of force policy. Ruth answered that she did not care what box he fit into if they let him break a door. Boone backed her before command could stall. Hearing those calls day after day changed the weight of words in the bunker. Patient, subject, threat, body, staff. The labels moved around faster than the facts. By day 5, the site had settled into a pattern nobody liked but everybody could follow. Work block, meal block, short sleep if you got lucky, badge checks at corridors that had once been open, medical observation wings filling one room at a time, security watches outside doors that now had internal bolt kits added over existing locks, decontamination steps posted at every service sink with more detail each day. Do not touch face. Remove outer gloves before straps. Bag exposed clothing separately. Report any fluid contact at once. Report any bite at once. Report fever at once. Those signs were everywhere. What did not show up everywhere was honest data on how many staff had already moved through observation, or how many had not come out. That information stayed on our side of the building, inside Ruth's files, Boone's incident notes, and the raw logs Curtis kept skimming before he cut them down for command review. I finally got one form of reply from outside late on day 5, and it was not from my sister. My outbound family message stayed in pending with no delivery flag. The reply came through the general incoming emergency message bucket tagged to staff family contact attempts that had failed direct routing. It was a 4-word text stamped through a county emergency relay somewhere north of the Potomac. Roads blocked, staying home, safe. No sender line survived the relay chain. It could have been from my sister. It could have been from a machine operator passing along fragments. I printed it anyway, and folded it into the small notebook I had started keeping in my bag. The one place I could write something that did not belong to the site. For the first time since the seal, I had a sentence from outside that did not come through an agency report or an incident log. It did not fix anything. It gave me one small fact I could work around. The first week ended with another command briefing and another cut to what staff were allowed to know. Drennan said some continuity sites had gone fully dark due to local conditions and staffing loss. He said regional mutual support was being reassessed. He said our facility remained secure, provisioned, and capable of sustaining operations. While he was speaking, logistics sent a quiet request to communications, asking whether we had corrected occupancy for unplanned long-term housing, and whether the new ration model should be calculated on 228 or 243 people. I sent the number we had from active badge logs plus known medical holds, and got a reply 6 minutes later asking me to confirm again with housing and dorm overflow. Provisioned was already doing a lot of work in Drennan's sentences. That same evening, Sonia Bell came into our room looking for a lost medication transfer receipt. She had circles under her eyes, and a hand tremor she was trying to hide by keeping her fingers wrapped around a clipboard. While I checked records for her receipt, she said procurement had been ordered to start cataloging non-replaceable items by remaining service life instead of by stock count. I asked what that meant in plain terms. She said it meant command no longer cared how many boxes of something were on a shelf, if the machine that used them had one seal, one filter bank, or one motor left before failure. Then she said she had not told me that, took the receipt, and left before I could ask more. I sat with that for the rest of the shift. Air, water, power, medicine, doors, fuel. Everything in the bunker could be counted 2 ways: total stock or time left. Near midnight on the 7th day, a county law enforcement repeater came alive out of nowhere, with a deputy's voice asking if anyone on state or federal could hear him. I answered through the approved relay path before command could tell me not to. He gave one location near a burned-out service station, one cruiser running out of fuel, and one request for directions to any secure government site. I was not allowed to give our location. I was not allowed to confirm shelter. I was allowed to take a message and route him to regional guidance that no longer existed in any practical way. He asked me twice if there was any place left where the doors held. I looked at the lower service closure map pinned beside my console. the new bolt kit request stack on Curtis's desk, and the observation wing count waiting in my queue. Then, I gave him the only honest line I could say without breaking orders. Avoid noise. Avoid hospitals and crowds. Stay moving before dark if you have fuel. He was quiet for a second, then said, "So that's where we are," and cut his mic. I sat there with the dead repeater tone in my headset, and kept my hand on the transmit key a second too long. Curtis looked up from his office doorway and asked who I had on that line. I told him county law enforcement. No route sustainable. No relay available. He watched me for a second, then said, "Keep the record." That was all. No correction, no lecture. By then, even he had started sounding like a man who knew the site was not sitting at the center of an organized recovery. It was one bunker full of tired people, locked doors, shrinking inventories, and a few working radios in a country that was going quiet in pieces. When the shift finally eased enough for me to rotate out, I walked back to my room through a corridor lined with new signage. Restricted movement, medical observation, service route changed, report fever immediately. The signs had gone up so fast some were still curling at the corners. Sonia Bell was asleep in her bunk with a ration wrapper on the blanket beside her. Warren Keel was awake, sitting at the desk with the mirror turned slightly toward the wall so he did not have to look at himself while he filled out transport forms no one had asked him to complete. He looked over when I came in and asked, "Do we know if there's another site up and running past us?" I took off my shoes, set them under the bunk, and told him, "Some answer, some don't." He nodded once and went back to his forms. I lay down on the top bunk without opening the blanket all the way, stared at the concrete ceiling a few feet above my face, and listened to the building hum around the room. Air moving through ducts, a door closing down the hall, a distant cartwheel hitting a floor seam. Somewhere above us, Command was writing briefings about continuity and order. Somewhere below, Ruth and Boone were keeping doors shut on people who had stopped being people in any way that helped the rest of us. And in the middle of it, my board would be waiting again in a few hours, full of missed check-ins, dead retries, and the last voices still trying to reach somebody. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares, signing off.